You're listening to the Generation to Generation podcast, episode 7. Joining me on the podcast today is author and professor Darrell Puls. He's the author of the book that will soon be coming out, We Pray, They Pray, Recognizing and Countering Narcissist Pastors. As we look at God's Word, we see that Jesus warned us about wolves dressed as shepherds coming into the church to kill and destroy. Our conversation covers a wide range of topics today, including the impact of narcissistic leadership in the church, how to recognize the traits in ourselves and others that are unhealthy and damaging to community, and what we as leaders in the church can do to shepherd those the Lord has entrusted to us. Darrell offers great advice on ministry that I think will be a source of encouragement. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. Joining me on the podcast today is author and professor Darrell Puls. He's the author of the book, The Road Home, A Guided Journey to Church Forgiveness and Reconciliation, and another book that will be coming out soon, We Pray, They Pray, Recognizing and Countering Narcissist Pastors. He's also the founder of Peace Bridge Ministries, a Christian nonprofit that works directly with faith communities experiencing internal conflict. Darrell, it's really exciting to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, I was wondering maybe just a good place for us to get started, if you could share a little bit with our listeners where you're currently ministering at, and then kind of with that, just really what led you to write about this issue of narcissism and its impact on the church.
Sure. I've tried to retire twice, and it hasn't worked. I'm currently the Dean of Academic Affairs at Gather for Him Christian College in Kennewick, Washington. We're very small, but we are accredited and so on, and it's good work. I love being around the students. They give me a great deal of energy. As for how I got into the issue of narcissistic pastors, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, actually starting around 2002, I took an early retirement. We were financially stable. We were able to do it. We were truly blessed. And my senior pastor and executive pastor came to me and asked me if I would consider coming on staff as a staff pastor and also to lead the efforts to create a functioning, accredited graduate level seminary. They were adamant that they'd been praying about this for a great deal of time and that my name was the only name that kept coming up. After praying about it, talking with my wife, we agreed that I should do this, so I did. The work was good for a while, and I noticed some things about the senior pastor. He's a very quiet man. He's a shy man, but he had a way of bragging about all of his accomplishments in a way that most people really wouldn't pick up on. But I also noticed how he treated some of the other staff when he was upset, and there was nothing Christian about it. But in my third year there, he asked me to preach for him on a Wednesday night for about 200 of our leaders. It was a fairly large church, and I did. And as part of it, he was in his 70s at that point, and I said to the group that he was not always going to be with us, and I did not hope the day came quickly when he would be retiring, but that we had to be ready to step up when that day finally came. Well, I had no idea that he never intended to retire, and at that point, apparently, I became his enemy. Mm-hmm. The next thing I knew, I was going to fly down to California for a training for a ministry we wanted to start. And 3 days before I was going to leave, I asked him if there was anything special he wanted me to do. And he says, "Oh, we're not doing that anymore. Cancel your ticket," which was a surprise to me. Mm-hmm. And then he said, "We're canceling the seminary." And the next thing I knew, everything I loved to do at that church was gone. And none of the other pastors would speak to me. I was being shunned. And it was totally disconcerting because I did not know what it was. And finally, he walked into my office one day, and without any introduction, he chewed me out in a way that I had never experienced previously. Now, you have to understand, I'm coming from corporate conflict management. You got to have a thick skin. I used to be a union negotiator. Mm-hmm. This was the most devastating attack I've ever experienced. He knew every weakness of mine, and he came after every last one of them. And I had totally trusted this man. I trusted him too much, is what it turned out. And I was totally confused and totally demoralized. And I was at the point, I was finishing my doctoral degree, and I was ready to walk away from everything. And I talked to a Christian counselor here in town. He says, get out now. You can't win this one. Get out. And he says, you're dealing with narcissistic personality disorder. I didn't even know what that was.
Mm-hmm.
And then my doctoral committee chair, her husband is a psychiatrist. He said the same thing. Get out. Get out now. You can't win this. It's only going to get worse. And I finally said, okay, and I resigned. And it was one of the worst times of my life. It really was. I was totally ready to walk away from everything. And I remember my wife and I have a small cabin cruiser that we keep on the Columbia River here near to our home. And I was down there in the marina. There was nobody else around, and I was praying, and I can't even say I was using words. It was that deep.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a pity party, really, and feeling sorry for myself. And in the middle of it all, I heard this voice say as clearly as anything I'd ever heard, trust me. And I have to tell you, I looked around and said, who said that? And there's nobody within 100 yards. And I thought, okay, was that the voice of God? Did I just hear God? And I decided, okay, I'm going to trust. And I continued on. I started to research narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder. I think I bought every textbook that was published on it at the time, and began to read. And the more I read, the more I began to understand that this is not an isolated phenomenon, that there are at least two types of narcissists out there in the pastorate. And I had just encountered what we call the covert narcissist, the shy narcissist. Mm-hmm. And I just felt absolutely called to deal with this, to confront it head on. So I began to write some articles on it. And some of them were published. And finally, the idea of a book came to me, and began writing the first book on narcissist pastors, and which is now being revised. And as you said, it should be coming out very shortly.
And Darrell, I had read a little bit about your story. I just, as you share, just makes me so thankful for those two people speaking in to your life at that moment, as far as just the need for you to get out. I want to say you had written this a while back. Just in those situations, there's many times only three options. Either stay and suffer and get sick, leave, which you did, or get fired. But I think for so many that are in those, for so many in those situations, it could be so disorienting, and just this complete upending of their world, and just completely blindsided relationally. And, that's why I'm just really looking forward to this conversation, today. And, I appreciate where you write, over the years that, all of us have budding narcissists within ourselves, but that can be very different from being a true narcissist. And so I was just kind of wondering if you could share a little bit, about what you mean when you write about narcissism, and what it might look like for someone to be in relationship to that particular type of person. I mean, you've already kind of mentioned kind of the bragging and the quietness, and then also just that quickness to go to rage. But what would it be like for someone who kind of finds himself in this kind of relationship?
It's first of all, if you're in a relationship, let's say it's a romantic relationship with a narcissist, they come on as the incredibly strong, as charming, as totally interested. You are suddenly the center of their world. The spotlight is on you, and it's really bright, and they'll do anything for you. They tell you what an amazing person you are, that there's nobody in their lives like you, and so on. And it's really quite powerful. They actually call it the seduction, which is exactly what it is. They are seducing you emotionally to get closer into the relationship. And what they're looking for are people who have a need to be in some kind of a relationship. And of course, with pastors, one of the first things they do when you meet them is they ask you all kinds of questions. Tell me about your family. What's it like growing up? Tell me about your kids. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear. Oh, your daughter's got a drug problem. That's terrible. And, you've been depressed, and they learn all these things. They put it away in a file cabinet in their minds. For you, for use when it, when it becomes necessary in their minds. And so it goes along, but it doesn't take long before they begin to see your imperfections. And once they decide you are imperfect, you are worthless. And unless you have some kind of value to them, they will turn on you. But there's basically 9 different traits that they have to a greater or lesser degree. The first one is they have this really exaggerated sense of self-importance. I'm an important person. I should only be dealing with other important people. I am more intelligent. I am more charming. I am better looking. I have more stuff. And so if you don't qualify in that, then they think that you are inferior, so inferior that they don't even really see you as a human being. One narcissist writer says, we see you as 3D cartoons to be used and thrown away. Yeah. Then they have this.
So true, just that view of seeing a human being in terms of what their competency or what they can provide, as opposed to someone who bears God's image.
Yeah. And so you've got, that there's that. Then they absolutely believe that they are entitled to all kinds of things, whether it's good grades that they have not earned, or it's awards that they have not earned, that they should be given the best seat in the house, they should have this, that, or the other thing. And they require constant, excessive admiration. I remember when I was a pastor, one of the other pastors, every week on our Monday morning debrief and staff meeting, she would say, "Oh my God, that was the best sermon you have ever given. That was amazing." Every week. And it's like, really? No, it wasn't. It was kind of boring. But they expect to be recognized as superior without any achievements to earn it. That's one of the fun ones. I had a student one time who came to me. I'd given him a C on a term paper, and that was a gift, quite honestly. And he comes to me and he says, "Well, I've got to have an A on this." Well, I'm sorry, you didn't earn it. But you don't understand. I need an A on this. You haven't earned it. I'm not going to give you an A. You don't get it. I need an A so that I can get into the university on this. I said, "Well, you haven't earned it, so I'm not going to give you an A." He was just incredibly angry that he thought he deserved an A simply because he deserved an A. They exaggerate their achievements and talents. Actually, they lie a lot. They lie constantly. They'll pad their resumes all over the place. They'll tell you about things all these amazing things that they've actually never done, but they want you to believe it. They are preoccupied with fantasies of power, of success, of brilliance. They tend to monopolize conversations. It's kind of interesting. Even no matter what kind of a conversation it is, within 5 minutes of coming into the conversation, they will do everything they can to take it over and to focus it on themselves. They do not recognize the feelings and needs of others. As a matter of fact, they do not experience the same emotions as what they call normals. They don't experience empathy. They do not experience love as we conceive of it. They don't experience gratitude. They don't experience guilt. They don't experience, so then, it's the basic emotions that they feel are fear, paranoia, and anger.
And I think, Darrell, just like for what you're saying is just why I just wonder why it's so disorienting, because, all of us are sinful, all of us have those seeds of narcissism in our hearts, but just
right.
Someone who's kind of further down this continuum where it's, you have these expectations in relationship for empathy, for a certain level of emotion. But, I think you had shared in writing just, narcissists are highly limited in accessing and expressing feelings, and, often kind of having these wild kind of fluctuations between irrational rage or, over emotional sentimentality, with little in between. And so it's just, people are always off balance relationally. And then it's just easy to kind of be in that moment and think, well, this is, obviously it's something about me, that this is the reason why this is off.
And they want you to believe that.
Mm-hmm.
This is about you. And they actually have a term for it. It's called gaslighting, where they intentionally try to make you believe that you're going crazy. They'll say something, and then they'll deny that they ever said it 3 minutes later and say, you're crazy. I've never said anything like that. How could you say something like that? And when you're under that constant kind of barrage, you begin to question your own sanity. They want to keep you off guard. They want the chaos. They thrive on the chaos because as long as there is a chaos, they are in control.
Yeah.
And that's key. They have to be in control all the time. Well, and people say, well, don't they, they do all these terrible things. Aren't they sorry? No, they're not.
Yeah.
They will never apologize. I mean, the best apology I ever heard from one was hilarious. It was a pastor, and I don't even remember what the situation was, but he says, all right, I'll be the martyr here. I'll accept your apology.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And he thought that was really magnanimous of you, because they don't apologize, but they do get even.
Well, man, I think even to that situation, I read where you wrote on narcissism, quoting Stephen Sandage, the professor of psychology of religion and therapy at Boston University, and Shane Moe, a licensed family therapist, where you said that, the dynamics of narcissistic pride and spirituality are complex, as an intense commitment to the sacred seems to fuel narcissism. And then you went on to write that this actually makes sense when you finally realize the depths and urgency of narcissistic neediness. If true narcissists recognize no one but themselves as God, then donning the cloaks of the sacred brings them into position where the worship of God is also vicarious worship of themselves. And where would you say maybe some other examples where you've seen that in ministry leaders, whether it's in the church or other ministries?
Well, sometimes it's very subtle. They will always work themselves into their sermons somehow, and it'll always place them into some kind of an interesting light. One that I heard of was constantly saying, I'm dyslexic, so I have difficulty reading, but even so, I still read 4 books every week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's designed to bring praise to himself about, wow, you're so dedicated. Well, I looked at his library. is he's got thousands of books, but there's no notations beyond the first 20 pages. Nothing. Or they will put themselves, the coverts, the shy ones will put themselves down and expect you to correct them. Say, oh, no, you're a wonderful person. You've done amazing things. Now, the overt, the in-your-face narcissists tend to take a position of, this church, under my leadership, is one of the greatest churches in this country, and we're going to be even greater. We are going to change the world. 200 people aren't going to change the world, I don't think, but what happens then is there comes a culture into that church where there's a false pride of how wonderful we are. And it comes out, I've seen it in churches where, you know, you can pick it up in their tagline that's on their website, such as, changing the world one person at a time. Okay. There's this grandiosity in them. Or they will say, other churches, pastors come to me constantly to see if they can do what we do here. Well, that's all, hey, that's me. They're coming to me because I'm so wonderful. So they'll always find a way of getting it in there. But one of the other things to look for is they have a very warped sense of humor. I mean, seriously. The one pastor, he was as a young man, he lived in northern Idaho, and every year they'd go elk hunting. Well, he said he was elk hunting, and he shot an elk, and it dropped, but he couldn't see where it was, and so he went running after it. He jumped over a log and landed right on top of the elk. The elk promptly got up and started running with him on his back. And he says, so I got out my hunting knife. He says, and I cut his throat. Almost cut his head off while he's still running. There's blood flying everywhere. I'm covered with gore. And he thought it was hilarious. And the congregation was turning green.
Yeah.
They just don't. They don't have a developed sense of humor, which is again another tip-off. That one of the things you can watch for. And it's not a single thing. It's a combination of actions, a combination of things that they do, and do they do it with regularity? And that's how you begin to spot them.
And Darrell, I mean, I think to that point, it's just been interesting. It's just part of the reason, just even wanting to press into this issue, is as I've been counseling just men and women in the church who are in ministry, just seems like this issue just growing and becoming more prevalent. And I even wonder, just even with that issue of just that sense of humor, like how do you see that connected to a lack of empathy? Because I would think, in one sense, like as you engage in humor, you're also thinking about the person you're in relationship with, and so do you see that as kind of a connection, just that there's this kind of detachment in one sense, like connected to that?
Yeah, yes, I do. There's a real detachment from society and from the norms that we expect of each other. For one thing, they don't recognize boundaries around other people. They routinely just violate everybody's boundaries, but you'd better not violate their boundaries. As they'll become very, very upset with that.
Yeah.
One of the more interesting things of it is people say, well, we'll just pray for them and that'll do it. I wish that were so. I mean, God can do this. God can do miracles. I absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
But they will not seek mental health treatment. The only things they will seek mental health treatment for is burnout and depression, and both of which are actually symptomatic of the narcissism. Because as much as we like to think they love themselves, that's not true. Inside, there's this inner hatred. They hate themselves. And so everything that they put out in front is it's a mask. It's a shield, a facade, something
like
to
the
hide
Wizard
behind.
of Oz.
Yeah, you'll pull back the curtain, and there's this little tiny guy pulling all the levers.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's exactly like that.
Yeah.
They're terrified that you're going to see them for who they are.
Yeah.
It's this emotionally stunted child trapped in an adult body, and so emotionally they're frozen in time, and they've never developed the coping skills that normal people develop, and they never are able to develop such things as truly loving somebody just for who they are. They'll love you for what you do for them, but that's pretty much it. And that'll turn to hatred at the drop of a dime.
Well, I would just really be interested in your thoughts on this, Darrell. I recently read where the Church of England, and you probably have seen this recently, is actually assessing their pastoral candidates for narcissistic personality disorder before allowing them to go through the ordination process to become pastors. Yes. And so I guess I was just wondering, you know, what would you say to the church hiring board or candidating committee for things to be looking for when hiring a pastor or filling a ministry position with the church, considering like what you said, that there's a level of charm, and, you know, I kind of refer to it as the AAA, you know, achievement, attractiveness, and articulation, that, you know, very articulate, very attractive, achieved a lot on paper. You know, how can a hiring board or candidating committee kind of navigate through that and really seek to really discern, you know, is this someone that truly loves the Lord and sees it as a privilege to love and pastor and serve those in the local church?
I think there is a tremendous amount of naivete in our churches. We believe that somebody is a pastor, that they are automatically anointed by God, that they are somehow better than the rest of us, they are holy, and we make these assumptions about them. And that's not a safe thing to do. Yeah. And then we take the path of least resistance. We look for pastors who are looking for a job because they're easy to find. They're the low-hanging fruit. And I always challenge search committees, why are you looking for someone who's looking for a job? Think about that for a second. They're looking for a job for a reason. You need to know what that is. And you need to dig. You know, if you find somebody that's attractive, okay, great. They'll send you their references. Well, you know what their references are going to say. I don't care about their initial references. Dig. Ask each reference, give me another name and phone number, somebody that I can talk to. You do that 3 or 4 times for each one. But by then you're down 3 or 4 levels and you're dealing with what really was going on. People will begin to tell you. Although in some cases, I saw this one time where contacted a reference and he said, "You're kidding me. He used me as a reference? Don't hire this guy." That was the arrogance. You just automatically assumed everybody was going to think he was wonderful. But then also there are other things that you can do. I recommend that once you get it narrowed down, well, there are some other indicators. We had one church where they had around 400 applications for the lead pastor position. It was a big church. About 10 of those said, you know, I've laid out a fleece, and it was raining like crazy, and the fleece was dry. So I know that God has called me to that church, and I cannot wait to get started. Okay, 1 maybe, 10 no. But you know, these are the tactics that they can use.
Yeah.
So I recommend that they have each, you know, when they're down to maybe 8 candidates, have each one write an 8-page essay telling you why they are the best choice. Now that is something the narcissist absolutely cannot resist.
Yeah.
Because that's what they want to do anyway. But there are certain trigger words that you know, if it's all I did this, rather than we as a team were able to do these things. There's a big difference between these. And then, if possible, have a psychologist go through those.
Yeah.
One who's familiar with the trigger words. And then I recommend that you have, if possible, have a psychologist on your hiring team. Also, churches tend to put business leaders on these teams. That's great for one or two, but you need a diversity of people. And what I recommend, and this really goes against the grain of some people, is you put one skeptic on there.
Yeah.
He's your designated bomb thrower, if you will. He's going to ask hard questions out of the blue that he will not see coming. A good friend of mine who owns a major medical equipment corporation here gave me a bunch of questions that are designed to throw them off. And some of them are designed to trigger anger if it's there. But, so you want to do everything you possibly can to weed these people out. But we've got this culture of politeness.
Yeah.
We ask nice questions. Tell me about your successes. Sure, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'd rather go, okay, I don't care what your friends say about you. Tell me about what your enemies say about you.
Well, I think that's just interesting, Darrell, just even, it's convicting as you say that, as far as followers of Christ, like, is there a level of complicity on our part, like in kind of Western American Christianity, where we default towards performance as opposed to character? And even just kind of what you're sharing right there, just, really speaks to, really, pressing into, does this person have the fruit of the Spirit? Is there a gentleness? Is there a slowness to anger? Is there a patience? Because, just the reality of vocational ministry, there's a lot that can be coming at you at a high rate of speed. And so, having patience and humility is of extreme importance in light of just the reality
let me give you
of ministry.
a couple of different examples here. One of my favorite questions is, tell me about your failures.
Mm-hmm.
The narcissist, I had one, it was in one interview one time, the guy says, I've never failed at anything.
Wow.
And I asked the question again, tell me about your failures. I don't have any. I've never failed at anything. Goodbye.
Yeah.
But then there's the one, so the answer you really want to hear is, you want the whole list of failures? Oh my gosh, it's long.
You're like, how much time do you have?
How much time do you have, I got a resume of failures here. And that's the guy I like right there.
And pull up a chair, grab some coffee.
Yeah, it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
The narcissist never picks up on those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. For them to admit failure is to admit that they are a failure. Mm-hmm. Whereas most people, you fail at something, you learn from it, you move on.
Yeah.
That's just life. That's how we learn. So, that's one question that's very likely to trip them up.
Yeah, that's really helpful. One thing, Darrell, I was just wondering, what would you say to the person in ministry who's listening to our conversation today about some of the things they need to be aware of or do if they find themselves in relationship with someone with these traits?
Yeah.
Whether that's the senior pastor with, dealing with a ruling elder or, an assistant pastor or someone in ministry, a ministry leader, what would you say to that person?
I would first become very aware of my own triggers. Mm-hmm. What sets me off? What are my emotional trigger points? And how much of this is about me? One of the things I'm coaching here at the college, for lack of anybody else able to do it right now, is our worship teams, the music. And I'm forever telling them, this is not about you. Mm-hmm. The second this becomes about you, I want you off that stage. There's that there has to be a genuine humility there. You will not find that with a narcissist. There is no humility at all. There might be a fake humility.
Yeah.
But, if you are dealing with one of them and you find yourself working for one, shield yourself, guard yourself, understand that he always has to have somebody to blame. Mm-hmm. No matter what goes wrong, no matter whose fault it is, especially if it's his, he's going to blame somebody else. And if you become that scapegoat, remember what they used to do with the scapegoat in the Old Testament. They took the entire sins of the nation and they sent it out into the desert. That's what's going to happen. So I became the scapegoat.
Yeah.
And it's not a fun position. Be aware of, boundaries. But if the person actually is really doing good things, emphasize those. But if you're going to coach them into away from some negative behaviors, always do it in a way that they are going to find attractive.
Yeah.
In other words, this is going to make you look better. This is going to help you. This is going to increase. Don't be surprised when they take the idea as their own and proclaim it as such, because they will. And just be extremely careful what you say and what you do, because you're going to be walking on eggshells all the time, because you never know when they're going to explode and who they're going to explode at.
I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Darrell, as far as things being filed away.
Yeah. Yeah. They over time, they pick up all these, they've got this really efficient brain filing system, where they just file these things away for future reference to use as weapons. And one of the first people I worked with was in seminary at the time. He had worked for a narcissist pastor, had been attacked, had been betrayed. He and his wife were just totally devastated. I worked with them for about 18 months. And he said to me, he says, he could even weaponize a compliment in such a way that only he and I knew it was an insult. Everybody else thought it was a compliment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, so they're going to find every way they can to get at you. If you cross them, they're not likely to fire you outright. They want you to leave. They're going to force you to leave. They'll do everything they can to force you to leave. They'll take away everything that you love and give you all the garbage assignments. You'll essentially find yourself doing nothing of any import, particularly doing nothing that you love. Mm-hmm. And that's a difficult situation to survive, and it's intended to be impossible to survive, because they churn through people. The best example I know of is in a 50-year career, one pastor went through 21 associate pastors. I was number 18 before he was forced into retirement.
Yeah.
Of the others, only one other is still in ministry. The rest left ministry entirely, and several left the church entirely. They were that broken by the experience.
Just the trauma of that.
Just the trauma, because we trust our pastors. Mm-hmm. We bring them into our most intimate moments. We tell them our deepest secrets. We ask for their advice. They're there when we, in our most sorrowful, mournful moments. They're there when people die. They're with us when people die. We're there at childbirth or celebrations. They do our weddings. And then we invite them over to dinner. They're the honored guest. You know something? That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's a powerful position. And that's what they're after, is power.
Darrell, just wanted to ask one more question. How do you think the church can do a better job loving and caring for men and women who, are experiencing narcissistic abuse and even just pressing more into this conversation?
Believe them.
Yeah.
Believe them.
Yeah.
I've got a letter in front of me right now that I just received, and she's talking about her narcissist dad who beat them and so on. But he says, I don't know what to do. He's still a pastor. He's still manipulative. He still steals from us. He still berates us. But he's smart. He knows we can't prove it because he made sure not to leave any typical evidence. Mm-hmm. The only hard evidence is signs of trauma and us remembering what actually happened, which he tells everyone, don't listen to her. She's always been mentally ill.
Yeah.
He's a very smooth talker. Everyone loves him. And the church board refuses to believe any of it. And that is the pattern that we see, is the church boards refuse to believe it until they have no choice. And now in one case that I'm working with right now, they've gone from 1,000 on Sunday morning to 300. And the church board is still, no, it's not the pastor. Well, then why have 300 people or 700 people left? You're in financial trouble because people are leaving, in this outpouring, and they're just in denial. We're able to, as human beings, we're very good at self-denial. Mm-hmm. We're really good at it, and we just don't want to believe these things about our pastors.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're real.
Yeah. Well, Darrell, I just so appreciate our conversation today. It's just such a good reminder just of the privilege and responsibility of loving and leading those we're in relationship with as followers of Christ. And so just wanting to wrap up now. And so just so thankful for your time today and how the Lord is using you. And was wondering if you could maybe close our time and lead us in a closing prayer.
Sure. Yeah. Holy God, we thank you for the privilege of being called. We don't always like what we have to do. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's miserable. But we see down the road when things begin to come together, we begin to see your hand in all of it. We begin to see the fact that you can turn the worst thing into something that is good, that you can counter this evil that has infiltrated our churches. We just thank you for victims coming forward and beginning to understand that they are not alone. They are far from isolated. And Father, I believe that you are raising up an army of people who have been through this and who recognize it and can be on the front lines to help the victims and to attack the satanic influence at its heart. So we ask you to be with us, guide us, protect us as we go about in this ministry, and help us to truly understand that this is your work and that this is what we are called to do. In Jesus' holy name I ask. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Darrell.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes or Facebook. If you know someone who might enjoy or be encouraged by the show, feel free to share the podcast with them. Your willingness to share the show is one of the best ways to help it grow. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time.